On the night of her wedding in 1930, a young bride entered the grand ballroom of the Banff Springs Hotel in Canada, her elegant gown billowing behind her. The room shimmered with candlelight, the sounds of joyous celebration filling the air. But tragedy struck when her dress caught fire from one of the candles. In a frantic attempt to escape the flames, she tumbled down the grand marble staircase, her neck snapping instantly. Her groom arrived moments later, only to find his bride dead at the foot of the stairs, still in her burning wedding dress. For years, hotel staff and guests have claimed to see her ghost, dancing alone in the ballroom, trapped in a wedding reception she never had. This tragedy, and the ghost that still haunts Banff Springs, is not the result of one lonely spirit, but a curse, a malevolent force born from the violation of sacred space. But what was the true cost of this tragedy, and why does this bride refuse to rest? The foundation. The Canadian Rockies rise like ancient sentinels from the earth, their peaks crowned with eternal snow, their valleys carved by glaciers that have moved across this land for millennia. Long before European settlers arrived, long before the first railway spike was driven into the ground, this was sacred territory. The Stoney Nakoda people called these mountains home. They called them the Shining Mountains. They knew every valley, every hot spring, every place where the veil between worlds grew thin. In the spring of 1883, workers for the Canadian Pacific Railway discovered hot springs bubbling from the base of Sulphur Mountain. The water emerged from deep within the earth, heated by forces humans could not see, touched by mineral veins older than memory. The Stoney Nakoda had known about these springs for generations. They were healing waters. They were also sacred. Some places, the elders said, were not meant to be disturbed. 5 years later, in 1888, construction began on the Banff Springs Hotel. The Canadian Pacific Railway had a vision. They would build a castle in the wilderness, a palace of European grandeur dropped into the heart of the Rocky Mountains. It would attract the wealthy, the powerful, the elite of two continents. Nothing like it had ever been attempted in Western Canada. The architect, Bruce Price, designed a structure that would rival the great hotels of Europe. Scottish baronial style, turrets and gables, stone walls 3 feet thick, a grand ballroom with ceilings 20 feet high, marble staircases imported from Italy, chandeliers from France. The construction required blasting into the mountainside. Workers carved away stone that had rested undisturbed since the last ice age. They rerouted streams. They felled ancient trees. The Stoney Nakoda watched from a distance. Some of them warned the workers. Some of them said that disturbing this particular valley would bring consequences. The workers dismissed these warnings as superstition. The hotel opened its doors on June 1st, 1888. It was, by all accounts, magnificent. Celebrities arrived by private rail car. European nobility booked entire floors. The ballroom hosted lavish parties where champagne flowed and orchestras played until dawn. The marble staircase, imported piece by piece from quarries in Carrara, became the centerpiece of the hotel's entrance. Brides would descend those stairs on their wedding days, their gowns trailing behind them, guests applauding from below. But within the first year, staff began reporting strange occurrences. Maids would enter rooms to find furniture rearranged overnight. Guests complained of voices in empty hallways. The temperature in certain corridors would drop without explanation, even in summer. One bellhop reported seeing a figure standing at the top of the marble staircase late at night, only to find no one there when he climbed the stairs to investigate. Management attributed these reports to overwork and imagination. The hotel was new. Old buildings settled, Pipes creaked. Wind howled through mountain passes and created strange sounds. There was always an explanation. The first documented tragedy occurred in the winter of 1892. A kitchen worker named Thomas Garrett disappeared during his evening shift. Search parties found his body 3 days later in a storage room in the basement. The door had been locked from the outside. The official cause of death was hypothermia, though how a man could freeze to death in a heated hotel remained unexplained. His fellow workers reported that Thomas had been complaining for weeks about feeling watched in the basement. He told them something lived down there in the dark, something that had been there before the hotel. The hotel owners paid his family a settlement and asked them to stay quiet. More incidents followed. A guest fell from a fourth-floor window in 1895. A maid drowned in one of the hot spring pools in 1903, despite being an excellent swimmer. A groundskeeper hanged himself in the boiler room in 1907, leaving a note that mentioned voices telling him to do it. Each time, the hotel management found ways to minimize the publicity. Accidents happened. People had personal problems. The hotel's reputation remained pristine. The wealthy and powerful continued to arrive by train, eager to experience luxury in the wilderness. Then came the summer of 1930. The wedding was scheduled for June 14th, a Saturday evening. The bride was a young woman from a prominent Montreal family. The groom was the son of a railway executive. It was exactly the kind of society event the Banff Springs Hotel was built to host. No expense would be spared. The ballroom would be decorated with thousands of roses. A 12-piece orchestra would play. The ceremony would take place at sunset, followed by a reception that would last until dawn. The bride arrived at the hotel 2 days before the wedding. Staff members who saw her described a young woman excited about her future, making last-minute adjustments to the seating chart, tasting the menu, ensuring every detail was perfect. She was 23 years old. She had her entire life ahead of her. On the night of the wedding, guests gathered in the ballroom. The ceremony concluded without incident. The bride and groom shared their first dance as husband and wife. The orchestra played. Champagne was poured. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Around 10:30 that evening, the bride excused herself to adjust her dress. The gown was elaborate, with a train that extended 6 feet behind her, multiple layers of silk and lace. She stepped into a corridor adjacent to the ballroom, near the top of the grand marble staircase. What happened next was witnessed by 3 members of the hotel staff. The bride was standing near a candelabra, one of dozens that lined the hallways to provide atmospheric lighting. Her dress brushed against the flames. Silk ignites quickly. Within seconds, the hem of her gown was burning. She panicked. Instead of dropping to the floor to smother the flames, she ran. She ran toward the staircase. The fire spread up the layers of her dress. She was screaming. The staff members rushed toward her, but she was already at the top of the stairs. The train of her dress, now fully engulfed, tangled around her legs. She lost her balance. She fell. 22 marble steps. Her body struck each one. By the time she reached the bottom, her neck was broken. The fall had killed her instantly, but the dress continued to burn. The groom heard the commotion from the ballroom. He arrived to find his bride lying at the foot of the staircase, flames still consuming her wedding gown, smoke rising toward the crystal chandelier above. Hotel staff were trying to put out the fire with tablecloths and water. Nothing in his face would ever be the same after that moment. The wedding guests were ushered out of the hotel. The body was removed. The marble staircase was scrubbed clean of blood and soot. The hotel's owners made a generous payment to both families. The death was ruled an accident. The newspapers were encouraged to be brief in their coverage. The ballroom was closed for 2 weeks. When it reopened, everything appeared normal. The hotel continued its operations. The wealthy continued to arrive, but the bride did not leave. The pattern emerges. The first sighting occurred less than a month after the tragedy. A night clerk named Robert McDonald was making his rounds at approximately 2:15 in the morning on July 9th, 1930. His route took him past the ballroom. The doors were closed, as they always were after midnight. But as he walked past, he heard music, not the distant sound of a radio or a guest's phonograph. A full orchestra, playing a waltz. He stopped. He listened. The music was coming from inside the ballroom. He tried the door. It was locked. He used his master key and pushed the door open. The ballroom was empty, dark, silent, but the temperature inside was at least 20 degrees colder than the hallway. His breath formed clouds in the air. He could see frost forming on the windows, despite the summer heat outside. And then he saw her. At the far end of the ballroom, near the windows that overlooked the valley, a figure was dancing. A woman in a white dress. She was spinning slowly, her arms raised as if holding an invisible partner. Her dress moved around her legs as she turned. The moonlight coming through the windows passed through her body. Robert McDonald stood in the doorway for perhaps 10 seconds. Then he left. He locked the door. He completed his rounds. He said nothing to anyone until his shift ended at 6 in the morning, when he told his supervisor what he had seen. The supervisor entered the ballroom. It was empty. The temperature was normal. There was no evidence anyone had been inside. Robert McDonald quit his job 3 days later, but he was only the first. Throughout the summer and fall of 1930, reports continued. Always the ballroom. Always late at night. Always the same figure in white, dancing alone. Hotel staff began to avoid the ballroom after dark. Those who had to walk past it would do so quickly, eyes fixed straight ahead. In December of 1930, a guest named Eleanor Price was staying in room 423, which overlooked the roof of the ballroom. She was awakened at 3 in the morning by the sound of music. She went to her window and looked down. Through the ballroom's skylight, she could see a figure moving below, dancing in circles. She watched for several minutes before the figure simply vanished, fading like smoke. Eleanor Price mentioned this to the front desk when she checked out. She was told she must have been dreaming. The pattern established itself over the following years. The bride appeared most frequently on Saturday nights, the same day of the week as her wedding. She appeared between 2 and 4 in the morning, the hours when the veil between worlds grows thin. She was always dancing, never walking, never standing still, always moving in the slow, formal patterns of a wedding waltz. And she was always alone. In 1935, a group of maintenance workers were repairing electrical wiring in the ballroom. It was a Tuesday afternoon, broad daylight. The room was well lit. They were on ladders, working on the chandelier fixtures. One of them, a man named Paul Tessier, happened to glance toward the corner of the room. The bride was standing there, watching them. Her dress was tattered and burned at the edges. Her face was pale, expressionless. She stood perfectly still for perhaps 5 seconds. Then she began to move toward them. Paul Tessier climbed down from his ladder. He told his co-workers to stop what they were doing. They all saw her now. She was walking, not dancing, moving across the ballroom floor with purpose. As she came closer, they could see details, the burn marks on her dress, the unnatural angle of her neck. her eyes, which were open but empty. The temperature in the room dropped sharply. Their breath formed clouds. The chandelier above them began to sway, its crystals clinking together. The bride kept coming. They ran. The work order for the ballroom was canceled. The hotel brought in a different crew a week later, workers who had not heard what happened. Those workers reported nothing unusual. By 1940, the haunting had become an open secret among the hotel staff. New employees were warned about the ballroom. Don't go in there alone after dark. Don't look too closely at shadows in the corners. If you hear music, walk away. If you see her dancing, do not disturb her. The guests, for the most part, remained unaware. Management was careful to book rooms on the opposite side of the hotel for anyone who might be sensitive to such things. The ballroom was scheduled for events only during daylight hours. At night, it remained dark and locked. But the bride did not limit herself to the ballroom. In 1942, a housekeeper named Marie Duchamp was cleaning room 218. It was early afternoon. She was changing the bed sheets when she noticed the temperature drop. She looked up. The bride was standing in the doorway, still wearing the burned wedding dress. Marie froze. They looked at each other for a long moment. Then the bride turned and walked into the hallway, leaving wet footprints on the carpet behind her. Wet footprints that smelled of smoke. In 1947, multiple guests reported seeing a woman in white descending the marble staircase late at night. But she never reached the bottom. She would fade before completing the descent, as if replaying her fall in reverse, as if trying to change what had happened. The hotel brought in a priest in 1950. Father Michael O'Brien spent 3 nights in the ballroom, performing prayers and blessings. On the 3rd night, he reported seeing the bride appear at the far end of the room. He began reciting the prayers for the dead. She started moving toward him. He continued praying. She came closer. When she was within 10 feet, Father O'Brien said later, he could feel the cold radiating from her like heat from a furnace. She reached out toward him with one hand. He ran from the ballroom. He refused to return. The haunting continued through the 50s and 60s. The hotel underwent renovations. Rooms were updated. New wings were added. Modern heating systems replaced the old boilers. Nothing changed the pattern. The bride continued to appear, dancing, walking, standing in corners and watching, always wearing the same burned dress, always alone. Staff members began documenting the sightings. An informal log was kept in the security office. Dates, times, locations, witnesses. The pattern became undeniable. The bride appeared most frequently in June, the month of her death. She appeared on the anniversary of her wedding every year without fail. She appeared most often between 2 and 4 in the morning. She never spoke. She never acknowledged attempts to communicate with her. She simply danced or walked or watched, trapped in the final hours of her life, unable to move forward. And then came 1974, the year everything escalated. The peak horror. James McCallum was not a skeptic. He was a paranormal investigator from Calgary who had spent 15 years researching hauntings throughout Western Canada. He had investigated dozens of supposedly haunted locations and found natural explanations for most of them. But when he heard the stories about the Banff Springs Hotel, something about them felt different. The consistency, the number of witnesses, the specific details that remained unchanged across decades. In March of 1974, he contacted the hotel management and requested permission to conduct a formal investigation. They refused. He persisted. He argued that a proper investigation could either prove the haunting was real or debunk it entirely. Either outcome would benefit the hotel. Eventually, management agreed, with conditions. The investigation would take place during the off-season, when the hotel was least occupied. It would be conducted quietly, with no media present. If McCallum found evidence of genuine paranormal activity, the hotel would decide whether or not to make it public. McCallum assembled a team of 5, 2 other investigators with technical expertise, a photographer, a psychologist to evaluate witness testimony, and a Stony Nakota elder named Thomas Snow, who had agreed to consult on the spiritual aspects of the investigation. They arrived at the hotel on April 15, 1974. They spent the first 2 days interviewing staff members who had witnessed phenomena. The accounts were remarkably consistent. The bride in the ballroom, the temperature drops, the smell of smoke with no source, the sound of music from empty rooms, the wet footprints that appeared and disappeared. On the 3rd night, they set up equipment in the ballroom, multiple cameras with infrared film, electromagnetic field detectors, temperature sensors, audio recording devices. They positioned themselves at different points around the room and waited. The first 3 hours produced nothing unusual. The temperature remained stable. The electromagnetic readings were normal. No sounds, no movement. At 2:37 in the morning, everything changed. The temperature dropped 16 degrees in less than 30 seconds. Every person in the room saw their breath form clouds. The electromagnetic field detectors began registering spikes, their needles jumping erratically. And then the music started. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once. A full orchestra playing a wedding waltz. The same waltz that had been playing on the night of the tragedy 44 years earlier. The bride appeared at the far end of the ballroom. She was not translucent or vague. She was solid, detailed, real. She wore the wedding dress, burned and tattered. Her neck was bent at an impossible angle. She began to dance. McCallum later described what happened next in his official report. The bride moved across the ballroom floor in perfect waltz time, her arms raised as if holding a partner who was not there. She spun slowly, her dress moving around her legs. The music continued, growing louder. The temperature kept dropping. The cameras were running, capturing everything. And then she saw them. She stopped dancing. She turned her head, despite the broken neck, and looked directly at James McCallum. Her eyes were black, empty, without recognition or awareness. She started moving toward him, not walking, not gliding, moving in a way that defied normal locomotion, crossing the distance between them in seconds that felt both too fast and too slow. The psychologist on the team, Dr. Linda Morrison, began screaming. Thomas Snow started speaking in his native language, words McCallum did not understand. The bride came closer, close enough for them to see the details of the burns on her dress, close enough to smell smoke and something else underneath it, something rotten. She reached out with one hand toward McCallum's face. He stumbled backward. The photographer, David Chen, grabbed him and pulled him toward the door. The entire team retreated from the ballroom. Behind them, the music reached a crescendo and then cut off abruptly. The temperature began to normalize. When they looked back into the ballroom from the hallway, it was empty. They had been inside for 4 minutes. The cameras had captured everything. When the film was developed 2 days later, the images were grainy and distorted, but the bride was visible in multiple frames, dancing, turning, her face clearly showing in 3 separate photographs, the broken neck evident, the burned dress unmistakable. Thomas Snow reviewed the footage and photographs. His assessment was immediate and certain. The bride was trapped. Something about the way she died, combined with the disturbed nature of the land, had created a prison. She was repeating her final moments endlessly, unable to move on, unable to rest. But more than that, she was becoming something else. The longer she remained trapped, the more the trauma of her death was consuming her original spirit. She was forgetting who she had been. She was becoming only the moment of her death, over and over, forever. He told them the land remembers what was done to it. The springs that were contained, the stone that was blasted, the sacred spaces that were violated. The hotel was built on a wound that never healed. The bride's death occurred at the intersection of that wound and her own tragedy. She fell into that wound, and now she could not climb out. Thomas Snow performed a ceremony in the ballroom with the hotel's permission. He burned sacred herbs. He spoke prayers in his own language. He asked the spirits of the land to release the bride, to let her move forward. He asked the bride to let go of her pain. For 2 weeks after the ceremony, there were no reports of phenomena. Staff members hoped the haunting had ended. Thomas Snow knew better. He told McCallum that the ceremony might provide temporary peace, but it could not heal the fundamental violation. The wound was too deep. The bride was too far gone. He was correct. On May 1st, 1974, the bride reappeared. But something had changed. She was more aggressive now. She did not just dance or walk. She moved toward people with intent. She reached for them. Staff members reported feeling physically grabbed by invisible hands. One housekeeper was pushed down a flight of stairs by something she could not see. Another worker reported being trapped in the ballroom for 20 minutes, the doors refusing to open, while the bride circled around him. The hotel management met with McCallum and demanded he fix what his investigation had stirred up. He told them honestly that he did not know how. The bride was beyond the reach of conventional investigation or intervention. She was no longer fully aware of what she was. She was a recording playing on an endless loop, but a recording that had gained awareness of its own repetition. That awareness had driven her to something beyond simple haunting. In June of 1974, on the 44th anniversary of her death, 15 separate guests and staff members reported encounters with the bride. She appeared in hallways, in rooms, on staircases, in the basement, always wearing the burned dress, always with the broken neck, sometimes dancing, sometimes watching, sometimes reaching out with those cold, dead hands. A guest named Richard Foster woke in his room at 3 a.m. to find the bride standing at the foot of his bed. He tried to turn on the light. The electricity did not work. She began moving around the bed, circling him. He could hear the rustle of her dress. He could smell smoke. He pulled the covers over his head like a child and prayed. When dawn came and he opened his eyes, she was gone. But his room smelled of smoke for 3 days afterward, despite the windows being open. The hotel brought in multiple religious figures, Catholic priests, Protestant ministers, even a Wiccan practitioner who claimed expertise in hauntings. None of them could provide lasting relief. The bride remained. Her presence grew stronger, not weaker. In September of 1974, a construction worker named Martin Hughes was renovating rooms on the 2nd floor. He was alone, working late to finish on deadline. At approximately 11:30 at night, he heard music coming from down the hall. He went to investigate. The music was coming from the ballroom, 2 floors below. He went downstairs. The ballroom doors were open. Inside, the bride was dancing. Martin Hughes made a decision that still haunts him. He walked into the ballroom. He called out to her. He said he wanted to help her. He said she did not have to be alone anymore. She stopped dancing. She turned to look at him. And for a moment, Martin later swore, he saw awareness in her eyes, recognition, a flash of the person she had been before she died. She opened her mouth as if to speak. Then her face contorted. The awareness vanished. She screamed. Not a human scream. Something else. The windows of the ballroom shattered inward. The chandelier began swaying violently. Martin Hughes ran. He did not stop running until he was outside the hotel, standing in the parking lot in the cold September air. He never went back inside. He forfeited his pay rather than finish the job. The hotel sealed the ballroom after that incident. It was not used for events for the next 6 months, but the bride did not need the ballroom to be open. She continued to appear throughout the hotel. The haunting had reached its peak. Staff turnover increased dramatically. Guests began leaving negative reviews mentioning strange occurrences. The hotel's reputation, carefully maintained for decades, began to suffer. Management considered closing the hotel entirely for renovations and cleansing. But they feared it would not work. They feared the bride would remain no matter what they did. So instead, they chose denial and silence. Official policy became to dismiss all reports of phenomena. Guests who complained were offered refunds and apologies. Staff who reported sightings were encouraged to take time off or seek other employment. The haunting continued. It continues still. The legacy and unresolved terror. Today, the Banff Springs Hotel remains one of Canada's premier luxury resorts. Guests arrive from around the world, drawn by the stunning mountain views, the world-class amenities, the historical significance. Many of them have never heard about the bride. The hotel's website makes no mention of her. Official tours do not include the story of the 1930 tragedy. Management has returned to the policy of silence that served them well for decades. But the staff knows. The bride still walks the halls of the Banff Springs Hotel. She still dances in the ballroom. She still appears to those who work late shifts, cleaning rooms and checking on sleeping guests. On June 14th, 2024, the 94th anniversary of her death, a housekeeper named Jennifer McLeod was working the evening shift. At approximately 10:45, she was pushing her cleaning cart past the ballroom. The doors were closed. She heard music inside. She tried the door. It was locked. She used her key card. The door opened. The ballroom was dark except for moonlight coming through the windows. And in that moonlight, the bride was dancing, spinning slowly in the center of the floor, her burned dress moving around her legs, her broken neck tilted at that impossible angle. Jennifer stood in the doorway. She had heard the stories. Every staff member hears the stories eventually. She watched the bride dance for perhaps 30 seconds. Then the bride stopped. She turned. She looked directly at Jennifer. Jennifer closed the door. She locked it. She finished her shift. She did not quit. Unlike many others who have encountered the bride over the decades, Jennifer McLeod still works at the hotel. She says the experience changed her understanding of death. She says the bride is not evil. She is trapped. She is in pain, and no one has been able to free her. Paranormal investigators continue to request access to the hotel. Most are denied. The few who gain permission report the same phenomena documented in 1974: temperature drops, electromagnetic spikes, the sound of music from empty rooms, and the bride herself appearing to those who wait long enough, patient enough in the right places at the right times. Some investigators believe the haunting will never end. They argue that the combination of circumstances that created it, the violation of sacred land, combined with the trauma of the bride's death, has created a permanent tear in reality. The bride fell through that tear. She cannot climb back out. Others believe she does not want to leave. That some part of her, the part that was looking forward to her wedding night, to her future as a married woman, to the life she should have lived, refuses to accept what happened. She returns to the ballroom because that is where she was supposed to be happy. She dances because she was supposed to dance. She waits for a partner who will never come. Thomas Snow passed away in 2003. Before his death, he returned to the hotel one final time. He was in his 80s then, his body failing but his mind sharp. He spent an afternoon walking the halls, sitting in the ballroom, feeling the energy of the place. When he left, he told the hotel manager that nothing would change. The wound was too old. The bride had been trapped too long. She had become part of the building itself, woven into its stone and wood and glass. As long as the hotel stands, she will remain. The hotel has no plans to close. It generates millions of dollars in revenue every year. The owners have made their peace with the haunting. It has become, in its way, part of the hotel's legend. Some guests actively seek out the bride, hoping for an encounter. They book rooms on the second floor near the ballroom. They walk the halls at night. Most of them see nothing, but some do. A couple staying in room 216 in January of 2025 reported waking simultaneously at 3 a.m. They both saw the bride standing in their room, near the window. She was not looking at them. She was looking outside, toward the mountains. They watched her for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Then she faded, becoming translucent, becoming air, becoming nothing. They did not report it to the front desk. They told no one until they returned home. The experience felt private, sacred almost. They said it was like witnessing a prayer, a desperate, endless prayer for release. The marble staircase where the bride died remains the centerpiece of the hotel's entrance. Guests ascend and descend it hundreds of times per day, unaware of its history. The stone has been polished smooth by decades of foot traffic. No plaque marks the spot where she fell. No memorial acknowledges her death. But late at night, when the hotel grows quiet, staff members still see her at the top of those stairs, standing, looking down, remembering. The ballroom hosts weddings regularly. Couples exchange vows where the bride danced alone. They cut cakes where she fell. They celebrate the beginning of their lives together in the space where hers ended. Most of them never know. The few who hear the story before their wedding usually laugh it off. Ghost stories, local legend, atmosphere to add to the occasion. But sometimes, in the photographs taken during these weddings, careful examination reveals something in the background. A figure in white at the edge of the frame, a face in the shadows near the windows, a woman watching from the corner. The photographers usually explain these away as tricks of light or artifacts of digital processing. The couples usually accept these explanations, but they keep the photographs anyway, and sometimes, late at night, they look at them again, and they wonder. The question that has never been answered, that perhaps cannot be answered, is what the bride wants. Does she want release? Does she want acknowledgement? Does she want revenge for the life that was stolen from her? Or has she been trapped so long that she has forgotten what wanting means? Has she become only the repetition, the pattern, the endless replay of that terrible night? James McCallum, now retired and in his 70s, still thinks about the Banff Springs investigation. It was the only case in his career where he found incontrovertible evidence of genuine supernatural activity and emerged with more questions than answers. He keeps copies of the photographs from 1974. He looks at them sometimes. The bride dancing, the bride turning, the bride reaching out. In his darkest moments, he wonders if she was reaching out for help, if she was begging them to free her, if they failed her by running away. But he also remembers the look in her eyes, the emptiness, the absence of the person she once was. And he wonders if there was anything left to save, or if the woman who walked into that ballroom on June 14th, 1930, died completely at the bottom of those stairs. If what remains is only an echo that has learned to scream. Some places remember. They remember violence and violation. They remember joy that turned to tragedy in an instant. They remember the precise moment when a life ended and something else began. The Banff Springs Hotel is such a place. Built on disturbed ground, consecrated by death, it has become a monument to the truth that some endings are not final. Some deaths do not grant peace. The bride dances still. In the dark hours before dawn, in the empty ballroom where she should have celebrated the beginning of her life, she continues her waltz with an invisible partner. She has been dancing for 94 years. She will likely dance for 94 more. And we are left with the uncomfortable knowledge that there are fates worse than death. To die is one thing. To die and remain trapped in the moment of your death, unable to move forward or back, repeating your final terror forever. That is something else entirely. That is a special kind of hell. The next time you stay in a grand hotel, the next time you walk through a ballroom lit by chandeliers, the next time you climb a marble staircase, remember the bride of Banff Springs. Remember that every building has a history, and some histories never end. Listen for the music in empty rooms. Watch for movement in dark corners. Notice the cold spots that have no explanation. And if you see a woman in white dancing alone, do not disturb her. She is not dancing for you. She is dancing because she cannot stop. She is dancing because she is trapped between what was and what should have been. She is dancing because 94 years ago, on what should have been the happiest night of her life, she fell. And she is falling still.